Welcome to our channel, Crime Loom, the place where true crime stories come alive. In a quiet town, the Miller family thought they had found the perfect home. But inside its walls, an old attic held whispers from the past. A missing girl, a hidden diary. Morning, Grace told her mother about the whispers. Laura smiled gently and brushed it off, saying old houses made strange noises, and Grace must have heard the wind. But Grace shook her head. She insisted it sounded like voices, quiet, but real. Laura gave her daughter a hug, telling her not to worry. Still, the words stayed with her all day. At breakfast, Ethan teased his sister. He said maybe ghosts were living in the attic and they wanted to talk to her. Grace frowned and told him it wasn't funny. Daniel interrupted, saying there were no such things as ghosts. He explained that old houses sometimes shifted at night. The wooden beams creaked and the pipes made sounds. That was all. Ethan grinned, but Grace didn't feel comforted. As the family settled into their new routine, small things began to happen. Laura noticed that her hairbrush wasn't where she had left it. A book that had been on the nightstand appeared on the floor. Amiels laughed when she mentioned it, saying the children probably moved things around. Laura wasn't convinced, but she said nothing more. One evening after dinner, Ethan suggested they check out the attic together. He wanted to prove to Grace there was nothing scary up there. Grace refused at first, but her brother promised to stay close and not to tease her. Daniel, overhearing them, said they could go look if they wanted, but to be careful. He didn't want anyone falling or getting hurt. The attic door was at the end of a narrow hallway upstairs. The door was old and stiff, and Ethan had to pull hard to open it. The stairs creaked as they climbed up, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The air was thick with dust, and cobwebs hung in the corners. Old boxes and broken furniture filled the space, as if time had forgotten them. Grace shivered and held Ethan's arm. They walked slowly, looking at the boxes. Ethan opened one and found old photographs of people in black and white, dressed in clothes from long ago. Grace stared at the faded faces and wondered who they were. Another box had broken toys and a cracked mirror. The whispers didn't come, not while they were up there. Still, Grace felt uneasy. As they were about to leave, something caught Grace's eye. A small book lay under a wooden chair covered in dust. She picked it up and wiped the cover. It was a diary, with the name Lily written on the front in faded ink. She opened it and saw neat handwriting inside. The first page said, "My name is Lily Whitmore. This is my story." Grace felt her heart beat faster. She slipped the diary into her bag and followed Ethan back downstairs. She didn't tell him right away what she had found. That night, in her room, she read the first few pages. Lily wrote about living in the same house many years ago. She mentioned being sent to the attic when her parents thought she had misbehaved. She wrote about being lonely, about hearing whispers when the house was quiet. Grace's eyes grew wide as she read. The words felt close, almost too close, like they belonged to her own thoughts. She closed the book quickly and hid it under her pillow. She wanted to tell her mother, but she wasn't sure how. Later that night, as Grace drifted to sleep, she woke again to the sound of whispers. They were clearer this time, almost like a young girl's voice. She couldn't understand the words, but she felt they were meant for her. Terrified, she pressed the diary against her chest and whispered back, "I hear you." The room grew colder, and the whispers slowly faded. The following day, Grace told Ethan about the diary. He didn't believe her at first, but when she showed it to him, his expression changed. He read a few lines and frowned. He wanted to read more, but Grace pulled it away. She didn't want him to treat it like a game. Meanwhile, Daniel noticed that Grace seemed pale and tired. He asked if she was all right. She told him she was fine, though she avoided looking into his eyes. Laura also grew concerned, especially when Grace started refusing to sleep alone. She often asked to keep the light on or wanted her mother nearby until she fell asleep. Daniel thought it was just the stress of moving. He told Laura the children would adjust with time. But that night, something happened that even Daniel couldn't explain. As he worked in his study downstairs, he heard the sound of footsteps above him. He assumed it was Ethan or Grace wandering around. But when he went upstairs to check, he found both children asleep in their rooms. He stood in the hallway listening. The sound of footsteps continued coming from the attic. He opened the attic door and climbed the stairs slowly. His flashlight beam shook slightly as he moved. The attic was silent, only the smell of dust and old wood surrounding him. He walked across the floorboards, shining the light into each corner. Nothing moved. He sighed, telling himself it was his imagination. But as he turned to leave, he thought he heard a faint whisper, soft and childlike, close to his ear. Daniel froze. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. He spun around, but no one was there. He left quickly, shutting the attic door behind him. That night, he didn't tell Laura what he had heard. Down the hall, Grace lay in bed with the diary under her pillow. She whispered softly, "Lily, I know you're here." The house groaned as if answering her. The night stretched on, filled, with quiet sounds and shadows that seemed to move. The Miller family had wanted a fresh start, but the house held secrets, and the whispers in the attic were only the beginning. The morning sun filled the kitchen as Laura poured coffee into her cup. She tried to keep things normal, chatting with Daniel about groceries and chores, but her eyes kept moving toward Grace, who sat at the table staring at her cereal. Ethan was busy scrolling through his phone, not paying much attention. Daniel noticed Grace's silence and asked if she had slept well. Grace gave a small nod, but said nothing more. She didn't want to talk about the whispers in front of her father. Not after he had laughed about them before. Ethan, however, leaned closer and whispered to her, "Did you hear them again last night?" Grace's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. She glanced at her mother and then back at Ethan. She nodded just slightly. Ethan grinned, his curiosity growing. "Then we need to go back up there. We didn't check everything." Grace shook her head quickly. "No, Ethan, I don't want to. It's scary." Ethan rolled his eyes. "It's not scary, Grace. It's just old stuff. Maybe you're dreaming, or maybe the house is making noises, but if you're right, and there's something weird, then I want to see it." Laura caught a piece of their conversation and frowned. She told Ethan to stop scaring his sister, but inside, she too was starting to wonder if something was off about the house. She had heard a faint sound the night before, like a door creaking open when no one was moving. She had convinced herself it was nothing, yet the doubt remained. Later, that day after Daniel went to work and Laura was busy in the garden, Ethan tugged Grace by the arm. "Come on," he said. "Let's go before Mom comes back inside." Grace resisted, but Ethan was already pulling her toward the stairs. She clutched the diary in her hands, almost like it was a shield. The attic door loomed at the end of the hallway. Ethan pulled it open, and the smell of dust hit them again. They climbed up, the wooden steps moaning under their weight. The attic was just as they left it, dark, filled with boxes, covered in cobwebs. Ethan shined his flashlight into corners, looking for something new. Grace held the diary tightly, not wanting to set it down. She felt as though Lily might not like that. They began to look through the boxes more carefully. One was filled with old letters tied with faded ribbons. Another held cracked plates and broken glass. Grace shivered when she saw a small doll with one eye missing, its face smudged with dirt. She pushed it aside quickly. Then she noticed something she had missed before. Near the far wall, behind a stack of wooden chairs, was a small trunk. The lock was rusted, and dust coated its surface. Grace pointed to it and Ethan's eyes lit up. Together they pushed the chairs aside and pulled the trunk forward. Ethan tried to open it, but the lock wouldn't budge. "Maybe Dad has tools," Ethan said. Grace shook her head. "No, don't. What if it belongs to Lily?" "It's just an old trunk," Ethan argued. "Nobody cares. She's not here anymore." Grace held the diary tighter. "What if she is?" For a moment, silence filled the attic. Then, faintly, the sound came again. Whispers, soft and broken, drifted around them. Grace froze, her face pale. Ethan stopped moving, his eyes wide. The sound was like words spoken through the wind, too low to understand, but clear enough to know they were not alone. Ethan whispered, "Did you hear that?" Grace nodded slowly, her lips trembling. "It's her." The attic door slammed shut behind them. They both spun around, their hearts pounding. Ethan dropped the flashlight and it rolled across the floor, its light spinning wildly. Grace screamed and grabbed his arm. Ethan pulled her close, trying to stay calm, though fear raced through him too. After a long moment, the whispers faded. The air grew still again. Ethan hurried to the door and pushed it open. To his surprise, it opened easily now, as though nothing had happened. He pulled Grace out, and they rushed down the hallway, not stopping until they were back in their rooms. That night, Grace read more of the diary. She found passages where Lily wrote about her parents. She described her mother as kind but quiet, someone who rarely stood up against her father. She wrote about her father being strict, sometimes cruel, always watching her. She said he locked her in the attic for punishment, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. And she wrote about hearing voices when she was alone there, voices that seemed to come from the walls. Grace's hands shook as she turned the pages. She read one entry that made her heart ache. "I want to tell someone the truth," Lily had written, "but if I do, he will be angry. He says no one will believe me. He says this is our secret." Grace whispered the words aloud, feeling tears sting her eyes. She thought of her own father, Daniel, who had never been cruel. She couldn't imagine him hurting her like that. Yet, she felt a heavy sadness for Lily, who had no one to protect her. Downstairs, Daniel tried to relax in the living room. He turned on the television, but his mind wandered back to the attic. He remembered the whisper he had heard the night before. It unsettled him, though he told himself again that it was nothing. When Laura asked if everything was all right, he smiled and said yes. But later, when he walked past Grace's room and saw her sitting with the diary, he felt uneasy. He wondered what secrets that book held. The next evening, Laura decided to do her own search. She went to the library and asked about the house's history. The librarian, an older woman named Mrs. Parker, recognized the address right away. She told Laura the house had once belonged to the Whitmore family many years ago. They were known in town, but had left suddenly under strange circumstances. Their daughter Lily had disappeared and was never found. Laura's hands tightened on the edge of the desk. "Disappeared?" she asked. Mrs. Parker nodded sadly. "Yes. People searched for her, but there was no trace. Some said she ran away. Others believed something darker happened, but nothing was ever proven." Driving home, Laura felt her heart pound. She didn't want to scare the children, but she couldn't ignore this. The whispers, the diary, the attic, it was all connected. That night, Grace woke again to the sound of whispers. She sat up, clutching the diary. The whispers were louder now, almost forming words. She leaned closer, listening. "Find the truth," the voice seemed to say. Grace whispered back, "Lily, I will." The air grew colder, and the light bulb in. Her lamp flickered. She lay back down, trembling but determined. The attic held more than dust and boxes. It held a secret, waiting to be uncovered. A secret that was not ready to stay hidden any longer. Laura could not shake the librarian's words from her mind. As she drove the children to school the next morning, she kept glancing at Grace in the rearview mirror. Grace sat quietly with her diary hidden in her backpack, while Ethan chattered about a science project. Laura forced a smile, but her thoughts were elsewhere. A girl had once lived in their house, and that girl had vanished. That was not something a mother could ignore. After dropping them off, Laura returned to the library. She asked to see old newspapers, and Mrs. Parker guided her to the archive section. Laura spent hours flipping through brittle pages, searching for the Whitmore family. Finally, she found a headline from 1957. It read, "Teenage Girl Vanishes from Local Home." The article described Lily Whitmore, age 15, who had last been seen in her house on Oakwood Lane. Her parents reported her missing, saying she must have run away. But the article mentioned something else. Neighbors claimed they had often heard shouting from the Whitmore home. One neighbor even told reporters she once saw Lily crying at her window. The police searched, but no evidence was ever found. The case went cold, and eventually people stopped talking about it. Laura left the library with a chill in her chest. She wanted to tell Daniel, but she feared he would laugh again or brush it off. She decided to wait, to learn more before saying anything. That evening, Ethan asked Grace if they could read more of the diary together. She agreed, though she warned him not to make jokes. They sat on the floor of her room, their backs against the bed, and opened the worn pages. Lily wrote about the attic, about the days she spent locked there as punishment. She wrote that she had discovered something about her father, something she did not fully understand, but that frightened her. "I think Father is hiding something in the house," Lily had written. "I heard him speaking with men late at night. They mentioned money and something about people getting hurt. I tried to ask Mother, but she told me never to speak of it again." She looked afraid. Ethan frowned as he read. "Do you think it's true?" Grace hugged her knees. "Yes, she wouldn't lie. She was scared." They turned another page. The last entry they found that night said, "I want to tell the police, but I don't know if they will believe me. Father says I must keep the family's secret. But if I stay quiet, I think something terrible will happen." Grace closed the diary quickly. Her hands trembled, and her eyes filled with tears. "She wanted help," she whispered, "but nobody listened." Ethan put a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe we can listen now. Maybe that's why she's still here." Meanwhile, Daniel sat in his study downstairs. The memory of the whisper in the attic haunted him. He told himself it was nonsense, yet he found excuses not to go near the attic door. Even when he passed it in the hallway, he felt a strange weight in his chest, as though someone was watching him. That night, as the family ate dinner, Grace asked her parents a question that froze the table. "Mom, Dad, do you think ghosts are real?" Daniel laughed awkwardly and said no. Laura hesitated. "Why do you ask?" she said carefully. Grace lowered her eyes. I think Lily is still here." Daniel's fork clattered onto his plate. "Grace, enough of this, Lily." "Nonsense. There's no ghost. This is an old house. Old houses make sounds. That's all." But Laura's hand trembled as she set down her glass. She did not argue, but she knew deep down her daughter might be right. That night, Laura tucked Grace into bed. Grace whispered, "She talks to me, Mom. She wants me to find the truth." Laura's heart pounded. She stroked her daughter's hair and told her to sleep. But when she left the room, she felt as though invisible eyes were following her down the hallway. Around midnight, Daniel woke to the sound of footsteps again. This time they were heavier, more deliberate. He grabbed his flashlight and crept upstairs, determined to prove it was nothing. He opened the attic door slowly, the hinges groaning. The attic was dark and still, filled with shadows. He stepped inside, and swept the flashlight across the room. His light stopped on something that made his stomach tighten. A chair had been dragged to the center of the attic. He was sure it hadn't been there before. On the chair lay the doll Grace had found earlier, its one eye staring back at him. Daniel felt a chill spread through his chest. He backed away, shut the attic door, and locked it. He decided not to tell anyone what he had seen. The following morning, Laura finally spoke to Daniel about her research. She told him about Lily's disappearance, about the rumors of shouting, and about the neighbors' suspicions. Daniel frowned, shaking his head. It was 60 years ago. Families have problems. It doesn't mean our house is haunted. Laura leaned closer. Daniel, I heard something last night, and Grace is terrified. I think this is serious. He sighed, rubbing his temples. All right, maybe the kids are just letting their imaginations run wild. But I'll check the attic again, in daylight, when... Ethan overheard this. He insisted on joining. Grace, too, though she clutched the diary tightly. Together, the four of them went up in the afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the small attic window, dust floating in the air. Daniel pointed to the chair. See? Just old furniture. Nothing more. But Grace's eyes filled with tears. That wasn't in the middle before. She moved it. Laura picked up the doll and set it aside. She noticed something strange near the far wall. Some of the boards looked newer, as if they had been replaced more recently than the rest of the attic. She touched them, and the wood felt loose. Daniel, look at this, she said. He examined the boards and realized she was right. They didn't match. He pushed gently, and one of them shifted. Behind it was a narrow gap, dark and hidden. Ethan leaned closer, his heart racing. What's in there? Daniel hesitated. I'll check later with tools. But that night, none of them could stop thinking about it. Grace dreamed of Lily whispering, "Find me." Ethan dreamed of footsteps and shadows. Laura lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what lay behind those boards. Daniel tried to sleep, but woke to the sound of whispers again. This time, he could almost make out words. They seemed to say, "Tell the truth." He sat up in bed, sweating. He realized that no matter how much he tried to deny it, the house was speaking, and it would not stop until its secret was revealed. The Miller family tried to go about their lives as if nothing was wrong, but the house would not let them forget. Every night, the whispers returned. Sometimes they were faint, drifting like the wind through the halls. Other times, they were close, like a soft breath against the ear. Grace grew more restless, waking up with dark circles under her eyes. Ethan tried to act brave, but even he jumped at sudden noises. Laura became protective, staying near her children whenever she could. She avoided leaving them alone in the house. Daniel, on the other hand, clung to reason. He told himself it was all imagination, that stress and old wood made strange tricks. But deep inside, he was shaken. He could not forget the doll on the chair or the whispers he had heard clearly in the attic. One night, Grace sleepwalked for the first time. Laura woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. She rushed out and found Grace walking slowly toward the attic door, her eyes half closed, her hand reaching out as if following a call. Laura grabbed her and shook her awake. Grace gasped and clung to her mother, whispering, "She wants me up there." Laura carried her back to bed, her heart pounding. The next morning, Laura told Daniel what had happened. He looked uneasy but tried to brush it off again. "Kids sometimes sleepwalk," he said. "It doesn't mean anything." But Laura's patience was thinning. "Daniel, this isn't normal. She keeps hearing Lily's voice. She's being drawn to that attic." Ethan joined them at the table, holding the diary. "Mom's right. Lily's writing gets worse the more you read. She knew her father was hiding something. She was scared." Daniel's jaw tightened. He wanted to take the diary and throw it away, but he didn't. Something in him told him it might hold answers. That evening, Ethan sneaked into the attic alone. He brought a small hammer, determined to look behind the loose boards. He worked quietly, pulling one plank aside. Dust filled the air, and he coughed. Behind the wall was a narrow space filled with shadows. He shined his flashlight and gasped. There were old letters stuffed into the gap, yellowed with age. He pulled them out, coughing as dust fell around him. He read a few lines and froze. The letters were written by Mr. Whitmore, Lily's father. They spoke of meetings with men in town, of money changing hands, of threats made to keep people quiet. One line made Ethan's stomach turn. "Lily knows too much. She will not ruin this family." Ethan's hands shook as he stuffed the letters back. Just then the attic door slammed shut behind him. His flashlight flickered, and the whispers rose, circling him like cold air. He shouted for help, banging on the door. Laura rushed up the stairs and yanked the door open. Ethan stumbled out, pale and shaking. He clutched one letter tightly. When Daniel read the letter later, he finally stopped pretending. His face turned gray, and he set it down slowly. "This isn't just ghost stories," he admitted. "Something terrible happened here," Grace whispered. "Lily wanted us to know. She wants us to help her." The family sat together in silence. The house creaked around them, as if listening. That night, Daniel dreamed of the attic. In his dream, he saw a young girl standing by the window. Her hair was long, her dress torn, her face pale. She looked at him with sad eyes and whispered, "Tell the truth." He woke drenched in sweat, unable to shake the image. The next day, Laura suggested calling the police, but Daniel hesitated. "What do we even tell them? That we heard whispers? That old letters accuse a man who's been dead for decades?" Laura shook her head. "No, we tell them about Lily, about the diary, about the hidden letters. Maybe there's more. Maybe they can investigate." Ethan agreed, but Grace begged them not to yet. "She's not ready. She wants us to find everything first." "I can feel it." The family returned to the attic, together in daylight. Daniel pulled away more boards, revealing a larger hidden space. Inside were old photographs, showing the Whitmore family standing stiffly. Mr. Whitmore's stern face seemed to glare even through the faded paper. There was also a small chest, locked and covered in dust. Grace reached for it, but Daniel stopped her. "We'll open it later," he said firmly. "Not now." That night, the whispers grew stronger. Grace heard them say her name clearly for the first time. She sat up in bed, clutching the diary, her heart racing. "Lily," she whispered. The air in her room turned icy, and the lamp flickered. She heard the words again. "Find the truth." Terrified but determined, she whispered, "Back, I will." Down the hall, Ethan woke too. He heard faint sobs, as if a girl were crying in the attic. He sat in bed, staring at the ceiling, his hands trembling. He wanted to run to his parents, but something in him told him to listen. The sobbing faded, leaving silence. By morning, everyone looked exhausted. Laura decided enough was enough. She called a local historian she had met at the library and asked about the Whitmore family. The historian confirmed what Laura feared. The Whitmores had been wealthy but surrounded by rumors. People whispered that Mr. Whitmore was violent, that he controlled his family with fear. When Lily vanished, some suspected he knew more than he said. But without proof, nothing was ever done. Laura thanked the historian, though her stomach turned. With dread, she returned home and shared everything with her family. "We can't ignore this," Laura said firmly. "Something happened to Lily, and this house won't let us rest until we know what." Daniel rubbed his face, weary and unsettled. He had always wanted a fresh start for his family, but instead, they were living in someone else's nightmare. That evening, the chest in the attic seemed to draw them back. Grace insisted they open it. She said she felt Lily wanted them to. With tools from the garage, Daniel pried it open. The rusty lock gave way with a snap, and the lid creaked as it lifted. Inside were folded papers, a ribbon stained dark, and the final pages of Lily's diary. Grace lifted the pages with trembling hands. The last entry was short, the handwriting shaky. I am afraid. Father says no one will believe me, but I know the truth. If you find this, please don't let them forget me. Laura's eyes filled with tears as she read. Ethan whispered, She never left the house. Did she? The attic grew colder. The family felt the weight of Lily's presence around them. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low. We need to tell the police. This can't stay hidden. But as they turned to leave, the attic door slammed shut once again. The whispers rose, louder than ever, echoing through the house. The Millers realized they were no longer just uncovering the past. They were living inside it. The attic door slammed so hard that the walls shook. Laura clutched Grace while Ethan stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. Daniel pushed against the door, but it would not budge. The whispers filled the air, louder than ever, circling them like a storm. Grace pressed the diary against her chest and cried out, Lily, we're trying to help you. At once, the whispers softened. The icy air in the room calmed, though the door remained closed. Laura pulled her children close while Daniel stood, guard near the window, scanning the room with his flashlight. Dust swirled around them, and shadows seemed to move in the corners. Ethan bent down to pick up something he had noticed earlier when the boards were pulled away. It was a small envelope hidden beneath the trunk. Inside were more letters, folded neatly but stained with age. He read a few lines and gasped. Dad, listen to this. Daniel took the letter and read aloud. She knows too much. If anyone asks, we will say she ran away. No one will believe her anyway. His hands shook as he lowered the paper. These are Mr. Whitmore's words. Laura's face grew pale. He silenced his own daughter. Grace whispered, That's why she's still here. She wants us to tell her story. Daniel forced the attic door open at last, the old wood groaning. They rushed downstairs, shaken and pale. None of them slept that night. The next day, Daniel called the local police. He explained about the diary, the hidden letters, and the strange discoveries in the attic. The officer on the line sounded skeptical, but agreed to send someone the following afternoon. While they waited, the house remained restless. Doors creaked open on their own, footsteps echoed through the halls, and Grace kept hearing Lily's voice call her name. Laura stayed close to her daughter, but she too began to hear faint cries at night, like a girl begging for help. That evening, Daniel sat alone in the living room, staring at the letters on the table. He whispered to himself, We should have never moved here. But deep down, he knew it was too late to turn back. Ethan, unable to sleep, went upstairs and stood outside the attic door. He placed his hand against it and said softly, Lily, we'll make sure people know the truth. I promise. For a moment, the door seemed to vibrate under his touch, and he heard the faintest whisper of thanks. The following afternoon, 2 officers arrived. Daniel led them upstairs and showed them the attic. He handed over the diary and letters. The officers read them carefully, their expressions serious. These are strong claims, one officer said. But we'll need more. Do you mind if we search the house? Daniel agreed, though unease spread through him. The officers examined the attic, tapping along the walls and floor. At one spot near the far corner, the sound was hollow. They pried, opened the boards, and dust filled the air. Behind the wall was a narrow crawl space. One officer shined his flashlight inside and froze. Call it in, he whispered. The family stood back as the officers carefully searched the hidden space. They uncovered fragments of clothing, brittle with age, and something far worse, bones, small and delicate, wrapped in a tattered sheet. Laura gasped and covered Grace's eyes. Ethan turned pale and grabbed his mother's arm. Daniel stood motionless, his face gray, unable to look away. The officers confirmed what everyone feared. "We'll need forensic tests," one said gently. "But it's clear someone was hidden here, likely for decades." Grace whispered, "It's Lily." That night, the house was heavy with silence. The whispers did not come, as though the discovery had brought some peace. Still, none of them could sleep. Grace lay awake, holding the diary, and finally felt Lily's presence less heavy, less desperate. But the peace did not last. A few nights later, Daniel was working late in his study when he heard a thud upstairs. He climbed the stairs and saw the attic door standing wide open. Slowly, he stepped inside. In the middle of the room, the doll sat on the chair again, though no one had touched it. This time, next to the doll was a small ribbon stained dark red. Daniel's stomach tightened as he recognized it from the chest they had opened. He whispered into the air, "We told them. We showed them. Isn't that enough?" The air grew cold, and the whisper returned, soft but clear. "Tell the truth." Daniel felt something deep inside him shift. It was not only about Lily's death. There was more hidden in the house, more that needed to be revealed. The police returned several times that week, gathering evidence. They confirmed the bones belonged to a teenage girl, though tests were still underway. Reporters began to circle the neighborhood, and neighbors whispered about the Miller family living in a haunted house. Ethan grew restless, unable to stay away from the attic. He told his sister, "It feels like she wants us there, like she trusts us now." Grace nodded, though she was afraid. She still heard Lily's voice in her dreams, urging her to uncover everything. One evening, while the family sat together, Grace opened the diary again. She flipped to the last page and noticed faint writing at the bottom, words she hadn't seen before. "Look," she said, "it's another message." The faded ink read, "He hid more than me. Look in the floor." Ethan's eyes widened. "The floor?" Daniel stood quickly. "No, we're not tearing this house apart. The police can handle it." But Grace shook her head. "She wants us to find it. She asked us." That night, when everyone else was asleep, Ethan crept into the attic with a flashlight. He tapped along the wooden floor, listening for a hollow sound. Near the corner by the window, he found it. Carefully, he pried up a loose board. Beneath, it was a small metal box, rusted and heavy. He opened it slowly, his breath catching. Inside were more letters, photographs, and what looked like a ledger. The writing detailed money exchanges, names of men, and dates of meetings. It was clear evidence of Mr. Whitmore's criminal dealings. Ethan's hands shook as he realized Lily had been right. Her father had been hiding more than just violence. He had been part of something dangerous, something that might have led to her death. Suddenly, the attic filled with a rush of cold air, and the whispers surrounded him again. This time, though, they were different. They were softer, almost like a sigh of relief. Ethan whispered into the darkness, "We found it, Lily. We know the truth." The air grew still, and for the first time in weeks, the attic felt quiet. But when Ethan showed his parents the box the next morning, Daniel's face darkened. "If this is real, it changes everything. It proves the Whitmores weren't just strict parents. They were hiding crimes." Laura looked at him with fear in her eyes. "And Lily paid the price." Grace held the diary close and whispered, "Not anymore. We'll make sure no one forgets her." The family realized the whispers were not only cries for help. They were a demand, a plea from the past to bring justice to a girl who had been silenced, and the Millers knew their part in the story was far from over. The Miller family had uncovered more than they ever expected. The police now had Lily's diary, the hidden letters, and the metal box filled with records. Reporters stood outside their gate most days, asking questions the family refused to answer. Neighbors avoided them, whispering about ghosts and secrets. But inside the house, the whispers had not completely stopped. They were softer now, but still present, reminding the family that Lily's story was not yet finished. Grace felt it most. Every night she heard the same words when she closed her eyes. Tell them. Don't let them forget. Sometimes she would wake up crying, clutching the diary even though it was no longer in her room. She felt a bond with Lily, as though the girl had chosen her as the one to carry her voice. Ethan grew restless. He had read through the letters and ledger several times, trying to understand what they meant. The names listed inside were unfamiliar, but the amounts of money were large. He guessed Mr. Whitmore had been part of some illegal business, maybe gambling or smuggling. But what caught his attention most were the last entries in the ledger. The handwriting was rushed, the ink smudged. One line read, "Lily suspects. Must act quickly." Ethan stared at those words over and over until his stomach turned. Daniel kept quiet, but Laura saw the worry in his eyes. He had wanted a fresh start for his family, but instead, he had brought them into a nightmare. Still, he felt a duty now. He could not abandon the truth, not when Lily had chosen them to uncover it. One evening, an officer came back to speak with them. He confirmed that the bones found in the attic crawlspace matched the remains of a teenage girl. While the official identification was still pending, everyone knew it was Lily Whitmore. The officer explained they were reopening the case, but since it had happened more than 60 years ago, it would take time to connect all the evidence. Grace asked the officer softly, "Will people know what really happened to her?" The officer knelt to her level and said, "Yes, Grace. We'll make sure her story is told." That night, the whispers were almost gone. For the first time, Grace slept deeply, but Daniel did not. He woke around midnight to the sound of a door, creaking. He left his bed and walked quietly through the hallway. The attic door was wide open. He froze, his heart pounding. Slowly, he climbed the stairs, flashlight in hand. The attic looked the same, but in the middle of the room, the doll sat on the chair again. This time, though, the ribbon tied around its neck was clean, no longer stained. Daniel took a deep breath and whispered, "We did what you asked. We told them." The air moved slightly, like a sigh. The light flickered, and for a brief second he thought he saw the figure of a young girl by the window. She looked at him with sad but peaceful eyes. Then she was gone. The next morning, Daniel told Laura what he had seen. She listened carefully, not doubting him. "Maybe she's ready to rest," she said, but Grace shook her head when she overheard. "Not yet. She wants everyone to know the truth, not just the police." Ethan agreed. "She doesn't want to be forgotten again." The children begged their parents to share Lily's story with the town. Daniel hesitated, worried about the attention it would bring. But Laura agreed with them. "We owe her that," she said. That weekend, Laura met with the local newspaper reporter. She told him everything: the diary, the letters, the discovery in the attic. She left out the whispers, but she explained the facts clearly. Within days, the story appeared in print. Family uncovers evidence in 1957 disappearance. The article spread quickly. Soon television crews arrived. People in town spoke of the Whitmores, of the rumors they had once ignored. For the first time, Lily's name was on everyone's lips. Grace felt proud, though she still sensed Lily's presence at night. She whispered to her, "See? They know now. They remember you." One evening, the family sat together in the living room, trying to relax. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the whispers returned, louder than they had been in weeks. Grace stiffened, listening closely. The voice was clearer this time. "Thank you," it said softly. Tears filled Grace's eyes. "She spoke to me," she whispered. "She said thank you." The room grew warmer, the heavy feeling in the house lifting slightly. The Millers looked at each other, understanding that Lily's spirit was finally finding peace. But peace was fragile. A few nights later, Ethan woke to the sound of scratching in the attic. He grabbed his flashlight and quietly climbed the stairs. When he opened the attic door, he saw nothing unusual. Yet as he stepped inside, the floor beneath him groaned. He noticed a section near the far corner that looked different, as if it had been repaired years ago. He crouched down and tapped on the wood. Hollow. His heart raced as he pulled at the boards until one came loose. Beneath it was another small space. Inside lay a tin box, rusted and bent. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside were more photographs, men in dark suits standing beside Mr. Whitmore. On the back of one photo were words written in shaky handwriting. "They will never know what we did." Ethan's stomach churned. He brought the box to his parents. Daniel studied the photos and shook his head. "This goes deeper than we thought. He wasn't just cruel to his daughter. He was part of something dangerous." Laura pressed her hand to her mouth. "Maybe that's why he silenced her. She found out." Grace whispered, "And now, she wants us to tell everything." The family knew their work was not over. They gave the box to the police, who promised to investigate further. Still, the Millers felt the weight of responsibility. It was as though Lily had chosen them not just to uncover her death, but to reveal the full darkness her father had hidden. That night, the house grew quiet again. Grace dreamed of Lily standing in the attic, her face calm, her lips forming the words, "Almost free." When Grace woke, she told her family, "She's almost at peace, but not yet. We have to finish what she started." The Miller family realized they were no longer just living in an old house. They were part of a story that demanded to be told, a story that had waited more than 60 years for the truth to come out, and they knew the whispers would not stop until Lily's secret was fully revealed. The Miller family no longer felt like owners of the house. They felt like keepers of its story, trapped in a mystery that refused to stay quiet. The police continued their investigation, but the Millers knew it was more than evidence and reports. It was about giving Lily her voice back, about finishing what she had tried to do before she vanished. Grace became the heart of this mission. She still heard Lily sometimes, soft and gentle, no longer desperate, but still urging her on. At night, she whispered back, promising she would not let her down. Laura often stayed with her until she slept, brushing her hair and trying to comfort her. Daniel and Ethan, meanwhile, worked with the police to hand over every letter, every photograph, and every scrap of evidence they found in the attic. But the whispers had not completely faded. They still lingered in the house, especially at night. Sometimes footsteps echoed across the attic floor. Sometimes a shadow passed by the window. The family grew used to it, in a strange way, knowing it was Lily watching them, waiting. One evening, the police called Daniel and Laura to the station. They had discovered new information from the ledger and photographs. The names in the records belonged to known criminals from the 1950s, men who had been linked to smuggling and extortion. Mr. Whitmore, it seemed, had been deeply involved. The officers explained that Lily had likely overheard conversations or found evidence of her father's dealings. Her disappearance matched the timeline of the last entries in the ledger. Laura asked softly, "So she was silenced because she wanted to tell the truth?" The officer nodded. "That's the most likely explanation. But thanks to what you found, we can finally close her case." When Laura told the children, Grace cried. She's been waiting for this for so long. Ethan hugged her, though his eyes were damp too. That night, the family sat together in the living room. The house was quiet, too quiet. Then, as the clock struck midnight, the attic door creaked open on its own. Grace stood slowly. "She wants us to come." The family climbed the stairs together, their steps heavy with both fear and hope. The attic was cold, but calm. The chair sat in the middle as always, with the doll resting on it. The diary, which had been with the police, now lay on the chair too, though no one had brought it back. Laura gasped, and Daniel stared in disbelief. Grace walked forward and placed her hand on the diary. The whispers rose, but they were soft and clear this time. "Thank you," the voice said. "You told them. You gave me back my truth." Tears streamed down Grace's cheeks. "You're free now, Lily," she whispered. "You can rest." The attic grew warmer, and for a moment the family saw her. A faint figure of a young girl, her hair long, her face peaceful. She smiled at them, her eyes full of gratitude. Then she slowly faded, like morning mist in the sun. The whispers stopped. The air in the attic grew still. For the first time since moving into the house, the Miller family felt a deep silence. Not the heavy silence of secrets, but the calm silence of peace. In the days that followed, the police held a small ceremony, announcing that Lily's case was finally closed. Her remains were buried properly, and the town gathered to remember her. For years her name had been only a rumor, but now she was a person again, a story told with truth instead of whispers. Grace placed flowers at the grave and whispered goodbye. Ethan stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Laura and Daniel watched, proud of their children for their courage, but also grateful the nightmare was ending. The house itself changed. It still creaked and groaned, but the strange noises stopped. No more footsteps, no more shadows, no more whispers. The attic became just an attic again, filled with dust and old furniture, but no longer haunted. Daniel repainted the walls. Laura filled the rooms with flowers, and slowly the family made the house their own. Yet they never forgot Lily. Her diary stayed with them, not as a ghost's demand, but as a reminder of the truth they had uncovered. Sometimes, on quiet nights, Grace would sit by her window and look at the attic window above. She no longer feared it. Instead, she felt comfort, as though Lily was smiling down at her from a place beyond. Ethan grew curious about history, inspired by the mystery they had solved. He began studying old crimes and stories, determined to never let people's voices be forgotten. Laura started writing about their experience, not to frighten others, but to remind them that the past matters, that every story deserves to be told. Daniel, though still shaken by everything, felt lighter. He had faced something he could not explain, and in the end he had believed. The Miller family had come to the house for a fresh start. Instead, they became part of a story that had waited 60 years to be told. They learned that secrets never stay buried forever, and whispers will always rise until the truth is found. The attic, once a place of fear, was now just another room. But to the Millers, it would always be the place where a forgotten girl's voice finally broke free. And so the story ended, not with silence, but with peace. You've just seen another chilling story from the world of true crime, but there are many more secrets waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe to Crime Loom, and join us as we unravel more heists, mysteries, and untold legends. Don't miss what's coming next, because in the world of crime, the truth is always stranger than fiction.